I am asking how, in the 21st century, in one of the richest economies in the world, a building housing hundreds of people turns into a deadly inferno. We cannot ask that question enough following the fire at Grenfell Tower. Devastating evidence that political leaders could have prevented this catastrophe will and must continue to plague them. This fire is Britain's Hurricane Katrina, revealing truths about the extent of injustice and insecurity for low-income people in our society that have been far too easy to ignore. Like George W. Bush in New Orleans, our Prime Minister's failure to respond immediately with warmth, compassion and certainty reveals a callousness that is part of the bigger picture of placing the interests of the rich above the poor. Like Katrina, the fire itself is the beginning, not the end, of the disaster. Our governments have been far too willing to ignore this unacceptable reality for far too long. We should be outraged not just at the scale of the problem, but that it takes a tragedy like this to wake us up.
I mean, just to pick you up on a couple of things. I mean, it's an extension of what we're saying. Hurricane Katrina cost $100 billion.
Just to clarify, I'm not comparing in the scale of the disaster, because obviously so many more people were killed.
2,000 people.
The comparison that I'm making is about the political response and how damaging it is when something tragic happens and a government doesn't act swiftly and appropriately.
It shows, I think, what Grenfell Tower exposes is, as we've said already, a failure of so many different parts of government, whether it's local government, whether it's national government, and cutting corners, quite frankly.
For the first few days, having lost everything, having heard people screaming as they were trapped in that building, they were being given £10 a day, and the Prime Minister went and didn't meet the victims.
I think you're right.
Personally.
I think it is appalling. But before we throw Theresa May under the bus, I think the first 4 days was a disaster, and I think everybody accepts that. I heard her this morning, in a speech, and actually I think that they are now responding. I think they are taking action. I think people will be held accountable. And I think over the next 3 or 4 weeks, we will start to see the action that the government take, which I'm hoping will be positive. At the end of the day, we do have rule of law in this country. Somebody is responsible for what happened. There will be a committee set up, and those people will get deserved compensation for what has happened. We house them, provide them everything. So actually, I'm probably a bit more optimistic than you are that listening to her speech this morning, I think she will take action, and I'd just like to see that she will address what you're saying.
I mean, just Nick, before I know what you're going to say, and you're going to probably...
No, respectfully, I have a slight bloody clue what I'm going to say.
I can make an educated guess, but just before you do, I'm not trying
what am I going to say?
I'm not trying to politicise this.
Go on.
I'm trying to link it to what I think...
You're going to do it anyway.
No, I'm trying to link it to what I think are much deeper problems. And actually, I think the Labour Party, when in government, and the coalition have all had a role to play in this. But, we've had this horrendous fire. There's so many questions now being asked about cladding and sprinkler systems. Housing in this country is in chaos. One in 3 people live in houses below the standard for human habitation. So when I say a callousness, I'm not talking about what Theresa May did or didn't do. I'm talking about the fact that we live in a society where we think it's OK for low-income people, 1/3 of them, to live in housing that's not fit for human habitation, and 1 in 6 that actually presents a risk to health.
You've actually said that this was Britain's Hurricane Katrina.
And that's
so
why.
You've clearly chosen to ignore that one was an act of God and another was man-made, but we'll put that to one side because you might not be able to grasp that. You also talked, I'm quoting you directly, about a callousness placing interests of the rich over the poor from Mrs May. Should we just walk through what that woman has done? I agree, her first visit to the scene was poorly handled.
Yeah.
Meeting solely with the fire services was wrong. She subsequently returned, quite rightly, and met with some of the victims. She then went to the hospital and met with some of the survivors. Over the weekend, she had more of the victims and some of the victims' families,
When I say callousness, I'm not talking about the way Theresa May behaved. I'm talking about the general approach of government to take it, looking after the interests.
She then prayed. This is a
people.
vicar's daughter. She then prayed with the Archbishop of Canterbury for the victims, for the survivors and their families. She has now ordered an extensive public inquiry. I would imagine she's worked damn hard to ensure that the Chief Executive has decided to do other things with his professional life, and she's made it quite plain that she expects an interim report of the full public inquiry pretty quick. She's made a lot of money available. Every family, quite rightly, is getting £5,000. Individuals over the age of 16 are getting £300. That will not go on their tax. They don't want any of the money back. It's not going to affect their benefits or anything else. To suggest that there's callousness placed placing the interests of the rich over the poor. When
harsh.
she's not had a great innings at the start, but by God, she's played well since.
I just explained that by saying that, I'm not just narrowly talking about the way Theresa May behaved. I think she made mistakes.
You did.
I'm not necessarily saying she is
But
a
you are
callous
throwing
person.
her under the bus.
No, I'm not. I'm not really interested in that. This is so much bigger than one politician or one prime minister or one party. This is the fact that depending on how much money you have and the circumstances of your life, you can live in a place that is potentially
she doesn't,
fatal.
as a vicar's daughter, you don't think she doesn't personally grieve and mourn for those people?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Callousness
That
placing...
is not what I'm saying. Are you listening to a word that I'm saying, Nick?
I doubt that over any of the people actually involved, she is grieving as much as anybody.
I am saying,
really,
and not just her, and not just the Conservative Party, but I'm saying successive governments...
You said she did.
I'm
Afua.
saying there is a callousness in government, not just this government.
You said she showed a callousness.
I didn't say she showed a callousness. I said this shows a callousness, and I made it clear to you that I'm talking about the actions of successive governments in providing adequate, safe housing for low-income people in this country. There's a pattern that has been going on for decades.
I think the use of the word callousness is, in whatever context, is wrong. I think there's very few people in this world that would be able to look at someone and go, do you know what, I don't care if you live or die just because you don't earn as much money as me or them or him. I don't buy that argument. I don't agree with what you're suggesting. What I'm saying is that actually what's gone on here is there's this constant lack of ability from any government, I don't care which one it is, to look at what's happening and learn lessons, whether it's, I know, for example, in Hull, where I'm from, I might not have mentioned that, but in Hull we had really severe flooding. We didn't really learn lessons from the flooding, so I would argue that if we ever had a massive flood again, we would struggle with many of the same issues. You know, this tower block fire, tragic as it is, it's not the first tower block fire. We haven't learnt lessons from before. And there is this real strong feeling to firstly learn lessons and secondly for there to be a system in place which allows people to properly report their concerns. Because as you rightly said before, the residents in this block, they were constantly saying, you know, we have this worry, we have this concern. That concern was falling on deaf ears. So what we've got to do in all of this is step back, and it has to be cross-government, because what I'm really struggling with is this politicising of issues, because actually this affects all of us. It doesn't matter what party you support. Cross-government, we need to come together with unity and say, how do we learn lessons?
Cross-party.
Cross-party.
Yeah, cross-party.
How do we learn lessons? How do we look forward beyond a 5-year parliamentary term, but long-term to fix these problems properly? And when people constantly say, Theresa May's fault, Jeremy Corbyn's fault, his fault, her fault, you're not going to get anywhere.
But it's also, I think, you know, where I said the government behaved appallingly was the initial stages, and I think that goes to show how important it is that you have contingency for these sorts of tragic events. And where you are right in terms of linking it to Katrina is, you know, Bush, he made a catastrophic error in terms of how he initially reacted to Hurricane Katrina by not engaging with the very people that had suffered, and that for me was a failure of government, because they should have been the first people there to show their support, and that would have, I think that could have tempered slightly the outpouring of anger, not grief, of course, but anger that was the reaction. She left the door wide open for that.
I mean, you try telling the people who lived in that block that the government response wasn't callous, and you also, when I say that, I just want to clarify, because I think it's been really misunderstood. You know, I'm not interested in blaming Theresa May. I'm sure that she feels, I think everybody, like you said, who's seen this has been horrified and heartbroken by it. When I say callousness, I mean a system that will have recommendations from a previous committee that this kind of cladding should not be used, that sprinklers should be installed, that residents fear it will take a catastrophic loss of life to be listened to, and they are ignored. To me, that is a callous system. How else can you describe a system that will ignore those kind of concerns until people die?